My Lords, I rise to support the Noble Baroness Lady Brinton's Amendments 3 and 17. And in so doing, I'd like to echo what she said about how this bill is better than the place we started from. And having spoken at second reading and during the committee stages and attended the meeting which the Noble Baroness Lady Neville-Rolfe kindly organised so that we could learn more about the intricacies and the granular detail of the bill, I'd like to commend the government for what they are trying to do. And although I'm going to give some painful examples to the House in support of what the Noble Baroness Lady Brinton has just said, I would exempt totally both the Noble Baroness Lady Neville-Rolfe and indeed the Noble Lord True, with whom I had a number of meetings in the run-up to the presentation of this bill in the House, and I do think that they have both been exemplary as ministers. So the Noble Baroness and I have been in correspondence about some of the points I'm about to raise over the course of the weekend. The reforms outlined by the government are based on what I think are laudable principles of public procurement set out in the Green Paper, and they are value for money, public good, transparency, integrity, equal treatment and non-discrimination. And I would urge Noble Lords to keep those in mind as I proceed through my remarks. Ministers have told us that streamlined new procedures will mean better commercial outcomes that deliver more value for money for taxpayers. So this amendment would ensure that those principles also extend, those public interest arguments extend to the National Health Service as well, as I believe that they should do. And the NHS should not be regarded, as it were, as a side issue or of little consequence. It should be within the same remit. In the year before COVID, my Lords, that is 2018 to 19, the DHSC spent around £70 billion on procurement in England, up from £68.3 billion in the previous year. Spending on health is by far and away the most significant area of government procurement spending. It's more than 3 times defence spending. Around £18 billion is spent on medicine, and coming to a point that the Noble Baroness made in her remarks a few moments ago, nearly £6 billion a year is spent on hospital consumables, which include gloves and syringes. During COVID, vast sums were spent on procuring PPE, a point I've made regularly in your Lordship's House, as other Noble Lords have done, particularly from the opposition front benches, about the kind of PPE that we've been buying from overseas, especially from the People's Republic of China. The House of Commons Library, in a note published earlier this year, has said that current estimates of the total cost of COVID to the government range from about £310 to £410 billion, the equivalent of about £4,600 to £6,100 per person in the United Kingdom. The portion of this spent by the Department of Health was put at £75.3 billion. Gross spending on public sector procurement increased by £53 billion, or 17%, between 2019 and 2021. Most of this increase was due to a £43 billion increase in health spending, a rise of 44%, and it's estimated that contracts for £14.6 billion have been awarded for PPE. Now, my Lords, I understand the arguments which the government have put on a number of occasions about the urgency of the public health crisis, and that many public procurement procedures were expedited. In some cases, these procedures resulted in suppliers being chosen without the contract being put out to tender or otherwise advertised. I hope that part of the purpose of this bill is that we have better procedures in place should another pandemic occur. Concern about how this was done led to a debate in the Commons on June the 21st, 2021, on a petition calling for a public inquiry into government contracts granted during COVID-19. Since the Noble Lord the Minister will have seen the outrage in the Commons last week about profiteering from unusable PPE and widespread concern about politically connected companies benefiting from government contracts, I hope that she will feel able today to respond to specific questions, some of which I made myself in your Lordship's House in January and March of this year during the committee and report stages of the Health and Care Bill, which the Noble Baroness Lady Brinton has referred to, and I refer the House to columns 635 on January the 31st and column 1032 on March the 3rd. Even before that, on the 13th of December 2021, I asked whether any person or organisation would be, and these were the words, censured for defaults involving the 47 VIP public contracts for face masks and surgical gowns. And I asked what steps the government had taken, I quote, in connection with defaults associated with their contract with PPE Med Pro. I referred the House to a report in the Daily Telegraph, which stated, and again I quote, ministers handed almost £150 million to Chinese firms with links to alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang amid a race for PPE after COVID hit, end of quote. It went on in that same article, my Lords, to state that, again, I quote, the Health Department paid £122 million to Winner Medical, which uses cotton produced by a supplier but works in the controversial region, that is Xinjiang, where it is said 1 million Uyghur Muslims are incarcerated, and where the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, said that a genocide is underway. It was also said it continued that £19 million contract went to a pharmaceutical from China, Mexico, and 16.5 million paid to Sinopharm, both of which have been linked to Labour programmes in the province. My Lords, at committee stage, I specifically asked about a Guardian report concerning MedPro, and in a reply on the 19th of January, I was repeatedly told that details about PPE contracts are, and I quote, considered commercially sensitive. I've never been able to understand, my Lords, and it comes right to the heart of this amendment that the Noble Baroness is moving, why the Treasury could account for the £4.3 billion lost in fraud under the COVID support scheme, but was unable to justify or identify the loss on PPE. Even worse, I was told, and I quote, we have no plans to censure a single individual or organisation. My Lords, in January I asked why not, and I asked the same question again today. In January, I was told that the government is seeking to recover monies paid to PPE MedPro in relation to a contract for the provision of gowns. It would be helpful, my Lords, for the House to know more about the remit of the public inquiry into COVID-19 being chaired by my noble and learned friend, Baroness Hallett, and whether it will deal in detail with procurement under the terms of reference, especially in the sections dedicated to preparedness and our economic response. Perhaps the Noble Baroness could establish whether it will examine the concerns raised by the National Audit Office. 1, the potential unequal treatment of suppliers in procurement processes. 2, poor procurement practice due to procuring at speed, for example, retrospective contract awards, a lack of documentation around key procurement decisions, lack of documentation on the management of potential conflicts of interest, and 3, lack of transparency over what contracts were awarded and how. We must not allow the concerns that the National Audit Office have raised to happen all over again, and these amendments, I think, help us to do that. But there are continuing challenges which need a response to, and I draw towards an end. I was shocked to learn that we've bought £1 billion worth of lateral flow tests from the People's Republic of China and spent around £10 billion of taxpayers' money into the PRC on over 20 million items of PPE. 24.1 billion items have a country of origin recorded as China, including 10.7 billion gloves. My Lords, this raises a lot of questions about dependency, which you would have thought we might have learnt after Germany's experiences with Putin, but it also raises questions about national resilience. Why couldn't things like this be manufactured here? And indeed, I have heard from companies in this country who tried to get contracts and who were capable of manufacturing these things and who couldn't even get into the competitive system because we'd suspended it. My Lords, there's nothing else that begs a lot of questions about why such things were unable to be made in the UK. I was also shocked to learn that we have a further 120, I repeat this, my Lords, because I thought it almost unbelievable until I saw it was revealed in a parliamentary reply in another place, a further 120 million items of PPE that are still in China and costing taxpayers some £770 million each and every single day to keep them there. I repeat, my Lords, 770 £1,000 each and every day to keep them. The millions and the thousands can multiply very rapidly in this debate, my lord, and I apologise. But I think you get the point, and it is over £20 million in the course of a year, £770,000 each and every single day. Now, I gave the Noble Baroness notice of my intention to ask about this. Who authorised those acquisitions? Who decided they should stay there? How much it's cost to date to store these items? How much has been budgeted to keep them in store at that cost of £770,000 every day, and for how long? I'd also like to know how much of the PPE that's been bought proved to be defective and unusable. And I'd also like to know how the government intend to report the money returned to public funds by defaulting PPE suppliers through the actions of the faulty contract PPE recovery unit. Secondly, individual settlements are protected by commercial secrecy. How will Parliament and public be notified about money returned to public funds by defaulting PPE suppliers through the actions of the faulty contract PPE recovery unit? And thirdly, how the government intend to provide transparency and accountability in relation to money returned to public funds by defaulting PPE suppliers through the actions of the faulty contract PPE recovery unit. My Lords, it's clear that the NHS should be subject to far greater scrutiny, transparency and accountability. And for all those reasons, I support the amendment today moved by the Noble Baroness Brinton, Amendments 3 and 173, which include the NHS in the definitions of a public authority for the purposes of this Act.
Follow the Noble Lord Alton, and I must say that I think when he speaks